Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, June 20th, and today is day 258 since October 7th. I would be remiss to not acknowledge that earlier this week was one of the holiest times in Islam with the marking of Eid al-Adha, a holiday commonly translated as the Feast of Sacrifice, the second of the two main Islamic holidays. As with Eid al-Fitr, the Eid prayer is performed on the morning of Eid al-Adha, or the ritual sacrifice of the sheep. That's what might be performed. In Islamic tradition, it honors the willingness of Abraham to sacrifice his son as an act of obedience to God's command. For those of us who self-identify as Christian, that's a part of our beliefs as well from the Hebrew scriptures. Muslim pilgrims used the early morning hours Monday of this week to perform the second day of a symbolic stoning of the devil, hoping to escape the noontime summer heat that caused heat stroke and sunburn among thousands wrapping up the Hajj pilgrimage. News reports showed umbrellas trying to provide shade to pilgrims who gathered in heat that rose up to 115 degrees, and reports of many who became heated or overheated and needed medical attention were reported. There was also significant news about the cost of lamb and what meat looked like for those celebrating the holiday or attempting to in Gaza. Meat used to be less than $10 a pound in the Gaza Strip before October 7th. And today, a kilogram, which is about 2 pounds of meat, costs 200 shekels, which is about $50 US. A live sheep, which could be bought for as little as $200 before October 7th, now costs $1,300, if it's even available. In the final days of Hajj, they coincide with Muslims around the world celebrating the Eid al-Adha holiday. And that, of course, looked very, very different for those in Gaza this year. The stoning of the pillars representing the devil takes place in Mina, which is a desert plain just outside of the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And then a third stoning happened Tuesday before the farewell tawaf, which is a circling of the cube-shaped Kaaba in Mecca. Eid al-Adha looked very different in Gaza, of course, as I mentioned. And yet it still was celebrated or acknowledged as much as it was able. All Muslims are required to make the 5-day Hajj at least once in their lives to Mecca if they're physically and financially able to do so. And these Hajj rites are commemorated, they're meant to commemorate the Quran's account of the Prophet Ibrahim, his son, Prophet Ismail, and Ismail's mother, Hagar. So this is, we talk about the sons of Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael. That's what the Hajj is all about. And so we have this in common with our Muslim brothers and sisters. One of the beautiful things that you see in the Old City of Jerusalem is that you can tell who's made the pilgrimage, because outside of the doors, they're often decorated with beautiful colors. And once someone has made the pilgrimage, their actual title changes and they're called Hajj or Haji. So I wanted to share that just because it's a significant week throughout the Muslim world. In other news, at about 5:30 p.m. this evening, it was reported that the U.S. military pier is back up and running and is now unloading humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip. Rifts seem to appear between Israel's political and military leadership over the conduct of the Gaza war. We've been talking about this. Some Israeli government officials have stated that 50% of Hamas's military capacity has been eliminated, whereas the spokesperson of the Israeli Defense Forces, Hagari, has said that that's not possible because Hamas is an ideology and cannot be defeated. According to the Associated Press, lawlessness has become an increasingly problematic issue in Gaza. It's one of the main obstacles to aid being delivered. This is because of the gap. So the Israeli military went in and destroyed and decimated certain areas and then left. And the Israeli government has not allowed any alternative government. So they don't want Hamas to rule, but they don't want anyone else to rule. And so there has been lawlessness. And so what's happened has been, according to an associate professor of political science at Al-Azhar University in Gaza, who's now in Cairo, Professor Abu Sada said the surge in lawlessness is a result of the growing desperation in Gaza and the power vacuum that has been left by Hamas's waning power over the territory and a territory's police force that has been targeted by Israel. Crime has reemerged and has been completely untreated. After Hamas came to power, one of the things that they brought was control to lawlessness of the so-called big clans. Now that's left for the Palestinians on their own to deal with. And so once again, we're seeing shootings between families, thefts, and all bad things are happening. Hussein al-Sheikh, the Secretary General of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization's Executive Committee, told the Saudi Arabia channel that the organization should be the one to control the Gaza Strip. Otherwise, a civil war will break out, adding that the US and Israel offered the Palestinian Authority the control of Rafah and the Rafah crossing once it resumes activities there. But the PLO refused because this should be done in coordination with Hamas. The number of living Israeli hostages held in Gaza could be as low as 50. I told you my opinions of this in the last few days, but the Wall Street Journal reported it could be as low as 50, citing mediators and negotiations and other official details. The assessment is based partly on Israeli intelligence. If that's true, it means 66 of the hostages that were believed to be in Gaza are dead, 25 more than Israel has publicly acknowledged so far. The IDF said that the Air Force assassinated another commander of Hezbollah's operations in South Lebanon. Those hostilities have continued between Hezbollah and Israel. And following Nasrallah's threat to attack Cyprus, the UN said that that would be considered a threat to all UN members. And so that conversation has continued. Israeli security forces have started to worry that the Iron Dome security system in the north would fail its capacities if there were to be an all-out war with Hezbollah, and Israel has begun to prepare for that possibility. And also, this is a very big deal. Martin Indyk, I don't know if you know that name. He was in the State Department under President Obama. He was the head of what was called CPEN, the Special Envoy of Israeli-Palestinian Negotiations. I didn't even look that up. That's one of the things I know from my very limited history. He also was a two-time U.S. ambassador to Israel. Martin Indyk said that he actually called on Congress to revoke the invitation for Netanyahu's visit. I was very excited when I read that, and then I read why. And it was because of this whole bickering, this political bickering, where Netanyahu did this video. The video criticized Biden for pausing or being slow on weapon delivery. The Biden administration responded by canceling this meeting between Israelis and Americans, talking about and negotiating about Iran. And so Martin Indyk said, Israel is at war on 4 fronts, with Hamas in Gaza, Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and with Iran overseeing operations. And what does Netanyahu do? He attacks the U.S. based on a lie that he made up. Now, I'm in total agreement that Netanyahu should be disinvited, but for different reasons. Maybe because the ICC and the UN have called him a war criminal, and there's a warrant out for his arrest, or maybe because under his watch, 37,431 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed. Maybe that's a reason he should be disinvited. I think it's an embarrassment to the United States that not only are we continuing to arm and weaponize a country that has continued to carry out not only an ethnic cleansing, but what many in the world are calling a genocide against more than 2.3 million people in Gaza. Now, after 9 months, there has yet to be recourse or accountability for violations of international law and human rights. Hamas should be held to account for their atrocities that they committed on October 7th. The thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent Palestinian children and youth and civilians in Gaza should not be held to account for the crimes of Hamas. Israeli security forces arrested 9 wanted people and confiscated weapons overnight last night in an operation in the West Bank. And that's pretty much an update of the nitty-gritty of what's happened in the last 24 hours. I did also want to make note, there have been reports, and I'll talk about this a lot more in the coming days, but there is an increased presence of U.S. troops in Jordan. This is significant because it looks like the U.S. would support Israel if there is going to be a war between Israel and Hamas. This is very disconcerting. Friends, may I just say it again, this is very disconcerting. It means that not only might the war against Gaza continue for the next several weeks or months, but the U.S. might even get dragged into, or even worse, willingly enter into a broader Middle East war. And I just want to close by sharing a bit. I talked on Sunday about how I preached at Wilmington Presbyterian Church. I was hosted by our incredible regional coordinators there, Mark and Carol, our church partners, and so many others who are donors or supporters of CMEP. But I was also accompanied by a young Egyptian Muslim man who's a filmmaker working with Al Jazeera. This man's living here in the U.S. with his young family. He was filming, working on this documentary about Gaza and U.S. responses and engagement. And he spent all day with me and the CMEP staff on Sunday and then again on Monday. And he was saying to me, Arab Muslims throughout the Middle East think Palestine is their issue. And they're devastated by what's happening in Gaza. And they care deeply. And he was talking about how he cares so deeply. And that he has been invested for days and days, especially after October 7th. And even for the first several weeks and the first several months. And he said, but then he just started to get used to hearing the reports. And then life just started to go on. And then he said, May, he said, after spending a couple of days with you, and he said, and seeing the work that's happening and seeing, the work of Churches for Middle East Peace and the work of these churches, he said, I just can't believe that day after day after day after day, you keep going and you keep doing the work you're doing. And he said, this is the first time ever in his life he'd ever been in a church. And he said, I can't believe that Christians care even more than I do as a Muslim. he was so moved. He was so moved that we care so much. And he said, he spent 2 days with us, and he said he was so inspired and motivated and encouraged. And, in the second half of my talk after the sermon and after the service, there was a Q&A and a talk. He put his camera down and he just listened and engaged. And at the end of the day on Monday, he said he was so inspired, and that he came to realize the liberation of Palestine is not just a Muslim issue or an Arab issue, but that the liberation of Palestine is an issue of the world. And he was moved that Christians are engaged and care. And I wanted to share this with you to let you know that in the midst of such horrific news and horrors day after day after day, that your work is making a difference, and that we will not give up hope, and that we will continue to work for an end to the war on Gaza, for an end to the hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel, for an end to all of the violence, for a release of all of the hostages. However many there may be in Gaza, we'll stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters and we'll call for their release. All for all of the prisoners that are held in Israeli prisons, all of the Palestinian prisoners held unjustly, so that all in Palestine may be free, and so that all of us one day may be free. So we'll continue to work for peace together. Amen.